Hello friends! Welcome back to the channel. Enjoy our new story.
I want to start with something I never thought I'd say out loud. After 11 years of marriage, the moment that finally broke me wasn't a fight, wasn't a betrayal. It was 4 words from my wife that she probably forgot by morning. I'm 39 years old, my name is Caleb, and I'm a civil engineer at a mid-sized construction firm in the suburbs. My wife Marina is 37. She works as a marketing specialist at a big online retailer, and from the outside our life looked completely put together. House we're still paying off, 2 cars in the driveway, stable income, no financial drama whatsoever. But there's something that numbers and square footage can't measure. And for the last few years that something had been slowly, quietly draining out of our marriage like water through a crack you keep meaning to fix. It didn't happen with a bang. That's the part nobody prepares you for. A marriage doesn't collapse all at once. It just gradually gets quieter until one day you realize the silence isn't peaceful anymore. It's just empty. We stopped eating dinner together somewhere around year 8. And the strange part is there was no fight about it. No conversation, no moment I can point to. Her schedule shifted, then mine shifted, and at some point we just stopped trying to sync back up. We'd go to sleep at different times too. I'd be out by 10. She'd be on the couch scrolling until midnight or later. In the mornings we passed each other in the kitchen like 2 strangers sharing a hotel lobby. A quick nod, a "have you seen my keys?" and then a door closing behind one of us. I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that we were both exhausted from work, that once things slowed down we'd find our way back to each other. And I told myself that for about 3 years straight. The night everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I got home around 6:30, heated up some leftover pasta, and Marina was at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her phone propped up beside it, half watching something with one earbud in. I sat down across from her, and I wasn't looking for a fight. I wasn't even looking for a deep conversation. I just wanted a moment of actual connection with the woman I had been married to for over a decade. I said something like, "Hey, can we just check in for a second? I feel like we haven't really talked in weeks." She didn't look up right away, and then she slowly closed the laptop and looked at me with an expression I still think about. It wasn't anger. It was something colder and more deliberate than anger. She said, "Caleb, I need you to stop doing this." I asked her what she meant, genuinely, because I didn't think asking your wife to talk was something that needed to stop. She said, "This, coming to me like this, like you're looking for something I'm supposed to give you on command." I told her I wasn't demanding anything. I just missed feeling connected to her. And that's when she said it. She looked me directly in the eyes and said, "Be a man and stop begging for intimacy." I didn't yell. I didn't slam my hands on the table. I didn't say a single word back. I just sat there for a moment and felt something shift inside me in a way that I can only describe as a gear finally slipping into neutral after years of grinding. Because she wasn't annoyed or tired or even frustrated. She was disgusted, and I had been feeling that disgust building for a while under the surface, but hearing it wrapped in those exact words was something completely different. That was a line you don't unhear no matter how much time passes. I stood up, put my plate quietly in the sink, and walked out of that kitchen without looking back. She didn't follow me, didn't call after me, and I didn't expect her to. I went upstairs, but I didn't go to our bedroom. I walked down the hall to the small guest room we never really used, with the old dresser and the window that looked out over the dark backyard, and I sat down on the edge of that bed and just stayed there in the dark for a long time. I wasn't crying, and I wasn't even particularly angry anymore. I was just completely still, and in that stillness something became very clear to me. I started thinking about who I used to be, not in some sentimental way, just factually and honestly. My best friend Jonas always said I was the kind of guy who made a room louder just by showing up. I played recreational soccer until my late 20s. I had a solid group of friends I actually spent weekends with. I used to drive 3 hours alone just to go fishing because I genuinely wanted to, because I had things I liked doing and I did them without asking anyone's permission. And somewhere in the last few years I had quietly traded all of that for this, for hovering, for waiting, for trying to earn warmth from someone who had long since stopped wanting to give it. I sat there and asked myself honestly, when did I become someone who begs? Not out loud, not in any dramatic way, but in every small and steady way that adds up over time. Suggesting date nights that never happened, leaving pauses in conversations hoping she'd fill them, checking her mood before deciding what kind of evening I was allowed to have. I had not just been neglected in this marriage. I had actively participated in my own disappearing, and that realization was more unsettling than anything she had said to me in that kitchen. I stayed in the guest room the entire night, And somewhere before sunrise, I made a decision. Not with a speech, not with a list, not with any dramatic moment at all, just a quiet internal shift that felt more solid than anything I'd felt in years. I decided I was done reaching for someone who had made it clear she didn't want to be reached. Done waiting for a warmth that wasn't coming. Done organizing my entire emotional life around someone who saw my need for connection as a weakness. And the strangest part of that moment was that it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like the first clean breath I had taken in a very long time. The next morning, I set my alarm for 5:30, nearly an hour earlier than usual. And when it went off, I didn't lie there debating whether to get up. I just got up, pulled on my old running shoes, and walked out the front door into the cold quiet of the neighborhood before the sun had fully come up. I ran for about 20 minutes at a pace that was more shuffle than sprint, and my lungs burned and my legs were stiff. But I finished and I came home, and I made my own breakfast, and I showered and I left for work without once checking whether Marina was awake or what kind of mood she might be in. That probably sounds like a small thing to most people. But for me that morning, it was the first day in years that I had moved through my own home without calibrating myself around someone else's energy. I want to be honest about something here because I know how this story can start to sound. I was not doing any of this to make her miss me. I was not running some calculated strategy to win back her attention, and I genuinely did not care in those first days whether she noticed anything at all. I was just trying to remember who I was before I started measuring my own value by how much I could pull from someone who had stopped wanting to give. And what happened next was something I hadn't expected at all. Marina didn't just fail to notice the change. She actually seemed more relaxed, like a low-level tension she'd been carrying for months had simply lifted now that I had stopped trying. And that told me more about where we actually stood than anything she could have said to me. The first week of my new routine passed without a single comment from Marina, and I'd be lying if I said that didn't sting a little, but it also confirmed what I had already started to suspect. I was waking up at 5:30 every morning without fail, running the same 2-mile loop through the neighborhood while everything was still dark and quiet. And by the time I got back, the house felt different, not because anything had changed in it, but because I was moving through it differently. I started cooking real meals for myself instead of just reheating whatever was in the fridge, nothing fancy, just actual food I put thought into. And I ate alone at the kitchen table with a book open instead of scrolling through my phone waiting for Marina to walk in. I had started reading again for the first time in probably 4 years, working through a beat-up paperback I found in a box in the garage. And it sounds ridiculous, but sitting in that guest room at night with a lamp on and a book in my hands felt more like home than anything I'd experienced in that house in a long time. I also started keeping a journal, which Jonas would have absolutely destroyed me for if he knew, but it helped me stay honest with myself about what I was feeling instead of letting it all compress into something I couldn't name. I moved more of my things into the guest room gradually, not all at once, not as some kind of statement, just a drawer at a time, a shelf at a time, until the room started to feel like it actually belonged to me. My gym bag lived there now, my books, my charger, the old fishing magazines I'd never thrown out. And Marina said nothing about any of it. For the first few weeks she seemed, if anything, lighter. The dynamic she had apparently wanted, a husband who didn't ask for anything, didn't bring up feelings, didn't reach for connection, was exactly what she was getting now, and she seemed comfortable in it. She moved through the house with her headphones in, worked late, watched her shows, and we coexisted the way two people can when they've stopped pretending they share anything beyond a mortgage. I won't pretend it didn't bother me at all, because there were nights in that guest room where I lay awake and thought about 11 years and what they had actually amounted to. But the difference now was that I wasn't going to her with any of that. I was sitting with it myself, writing it out, running it out, and slowly it got lighter. Then something started to shift in her, and I noticed it the way you notice weather changing. Not one single moment, just a gradual pressure in the air. She started coming downstairs when I was cooking instead of staying in her office. She'd lean against the counter and make a comment about what I was making, nothing deep, just small talk, but it was more than she'd initiated in months. I'd respond normally, keep it easy, and then go back to what I was doing without trying to extend it into something more. I wasn't cold about it. I was just no longer performing interest I didn't feel. One evening, she made a sarcastic comment about how I'd apparently become a morning person, and I just smiled and said, "It's working for me," and left it at that. She lingered for a moment like she was waiting for me to say something else, and when I didn't, she left the kitchen with this look I hadn't seen on her before, not quite confusion, but something close to it. She started testing things. I could feel it. Coming home later than usual and watching to see if I'd ask where she'd been. dropping little provocations into conversations, small criticisms, the kind of comments that used to guarantee a reaction from me. But I had nothing to react with anymore, not because I was suppressing it, but because I had genuinely stopped being emotionally tethered to her behavior. She could come home at midnight or not at all, and it wouldn't change what time I woke up the next morning or what I made for breakfast. And that indifference, the real kind, not the performed kind, was something she clearly didn't know what to do with. The moment I remember most clearly from that period happened on a Wednesday night about 3 weeks in. I was in the guest room after dinner, sitting at the small desk I'd set up near the window, writing in my journal with the lamp on, and Marina opened the door without knocking. She stood in the doorway and looked around the room slowly, and I watched her take it in. The bookshelf I'd organized, the lamp, the desk, the stack of journals, my running shoes by the door, the fishing magazine on the nightstand. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't a man sulking in a spare room. It was a room someone had made into a real space for themselves. She stood there for a moment and then said, "You've been in here a lot." I said, "Yeah, I have." She didn't say anything else for a few seconds, and then she said, "Is this just going to be your room now?" I looked at her and said, "It works for me." She nodded slowly, like she was processing something, and then she left and closed the door behind her. It was a short exchange, but I could tell it landed differently than she expected, because she wasn't dealing with a man who was upset and waiting to be drawn back in. She was dealing with a man who had simply moved on within the same walls, and that was a much harder thing to argue with or fix. The real test came about a month after that Tuesday in the kitchen, when we went to her mother's birthday dinner at her parents' house across town. It was a family gathering, maybe 12 or 15 people, and I came straight from a site visit, so I arrived a few minutes after Marina. I greeted her parents, said hello to her sister Leora, made the rounds, and ended up at the far end of the table from where Marina was sitting. Her father Arthur was next to me, quiet and steady as always, and we talked about the construction project I'd been working on, and he asked thoughtful questions the way he always did. I enjoyed that conversation genuinely. Across the table, Marina was watching me, not obviously, but I could feel it. The way you feel someone tracking you in a room. I was relaxed, I was present with the people I was actually talking to, and I wasn't looking over at her, wasn't sending signals, wasn't managing her impression of me. Her sister Leora sat down beside me at one point and said quietly, "You seem good, Caleb." I told her I was doing all right, and she looked at me for a moment with that particular kind of attention younger sisters have, the kind that sees more than it lets on, and she said, "I mean it. You actually seem like yourself." I didn't dig into that comment right then, but it stayed with me. On the drive home, we were in separate cars, and when I got back to the house, Marina was already inside. I could tell something was sitting with her because she was unusually quiet, not the comfortable quiet of someone winding down, but the tight quiet of someone trying to figure out what they're feeling. She sat in the living room, and I went upstairs and neither of us said anything. And I lay in the guest room that night thinking about what Leora had said, that I seemed like myself. And I realized that was probably the most accurate thing anyone had said to me in years. Because I did feel like myself again, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. And the strange and painful irony was that I had found my way back to myself not because my marriage got better, but because I had finally stopped letting it define me. The days after that family dinner had a different texture to them, and I noticed it almost immediately. Marina started doing small things she hadn't done in years. She'd ask what I wanted for dinner before she ordered anything. She'd leave the TV on something she knew I liked when I walked through the living room. She'd look up from her laptop when I came downstairs instead of staying locked in whatever she was working on. It wasn't dramatic and it wasn't an apology, but it was deliberate, and I could feel the intention behind it. She was trying to reintroduce a warmth that had been absent for so long that it now felt unfamiliar coming from her. One evening, she sat down next to me on the couch and brought up a trip we had taken to Vermont in our 3rd year of marriage, laughing about something small and stupid that had happened at the bed and breakfast we stayed at. I remembered the trip. I smiled at the right moments. But I was aware the entire time that I was listening to her the way you listen to a story about someone else's life, with interest, but without any personal stake in it. I wasn't punishing her by being that way. I just genuinely couldn't locate the version of me that used to live for those shared memories, because that version had spent years being told he asked for too much. She tried a few more times over the following week. A bottle of wine on the kitchen table one night, a comment about how we hadn't done anything together in a while, a hand on my arm when I passed her in the hallway. And every time I responded the same way, warm enough not to be cruel, distant enough to be honest. Then one afternoon she asked me directly, in the kitchen, standing across from me with her arms crossed, but her voice careful and measured. She said, "Caleb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me." I told her to go ahead. She said, "Is there someone else?" I looked at her for a moment before answering, not to be dramatic, just because I wanted to be precise. I said, "No, Marina, there's nobody else." She nodded but didn't look entirely relieved, and I understood why, because the answer that followed was harder to absorb than a yes would have been. I said, "I just stopped building my life around you." The kitchen was very quiet after that. She stood there, and I could see her trying to find the right response, and eventually she just said, "What does that mean exactly?" I told her it meant that for a long time I had been organizing everything, my mood, my weekends, my sense of self-worth, around how she responded to me, and I wasn't doing that anymore, and it had nothing to do with anyone else. She didn't say anything after that, and I didn't wait for her to. I refilled my glass of water and went back upstairs, and I heard her stay in that kitchen for a long time before she moved. About 2 weeks after that conversation, she told me she had made an appointment with a couples therapist named Dr. Celine, and that she wanted us to go together. I agreed without much hesitation, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I believed in being honest, and I figured a structured setting was as good a place as any to finally say things clearly. Dr. Celine's office was calm and neutral the way those spaces always are: soft lighting, 2 chairs angled toward each other, a couch, a box of tissues on the side table that neither of us touched. Dr. Celine herself was composed and unhurried, the kind of person who lets silence exist in a room without rushing to fill it. Marina went first, and she described what had been happening as a rough patch, a communication breakdown. 2 people who had drifted and needed help finding their way back. She was articulate about it, measured, and she framed it in a way that made it sound mutual and fixable. Then Dr. Celine looked at me and asked what I thought was at the core of the problem. I took a breath and said, "I don't think the problem is that we stopped communicating well. The problem is that I stopped needing her to show up for me. And now that I've stopped needing it, she's noticed." Dr. Celine didn't react visibly. She just made a small note and asked me to say more. I said that for years I had been reaching for connection in this marriage and being made to feel like that reaching was a flaw, and at some point I stopped. And what Marina was experiencing now wasn't a husband who was pulling away out of anger. It was a husband who had genuinely reorganized his inner life and no longer required her presence at the center of it. Marina said, "That's not fair. Caleb, I never told you that you didn't matter." I said, "You told me to be a man and stop begging for intimacy." The room got very quiet. Dr. Celine let it stay quiet. Marina looked at the floor for a moment, and when she looked back up, her expression had shifted into something more complicated than I had seen from her in a long time. The session ended without any resolution, which I think was the honest outcome, and on the drive home we were silent in a way that felt final rather than temporary. Several nights passed after that, and then one night I was lying in the guest room reading when I heard the door open slowly. Marina stood in the doorway in the dark hallway, and she looked tired in a way that went beyond just the hour. She came in and sat on the edge of the bed a few feet away from me and didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I miss you." I looked at her and I felt something. Not nothing. I want to be clear about that, because 11 years doesn't become nothing overnight. But what I felt was sadness more than longing, because I understood in that moment exactly what she missed. She said, "I want you to come back to our room." I was quiet for a moment, and then I said, "Marina, I think you miss the way I used to be around you. I don't think you miss me." She started to object, and I said it gently, not as an accusation, but as something I had thought about carefully for weeks. I said she missed having someone who oriented his entire world around her attention, and that person had made a decision to stop, and what she was feeling now was the absence of that dynamic, not the absence of me specifically. She sat there for a long time without responding, and I didn't push it any further. She left the room quietly, and I turned the lamp back on and tried to read but couldn't, and I lay there in the dark for a while thinking about how strange it was that the truest thing I'd said in this entire marriage had come out in a conversation that might also be one of our last. The next morning I got up at 5:30 the same as always, ran my loop, came back, and while the coffee was brewing, I pulled a medium-sized duffel bag from the closet and set it on the bed in the guest room. I packed it slowly and without drama. Some clothes, my journal, my charger, the book I was halfway through. I wasn't moving out permanently. I hadn't filed anything. I hadn't made any permanent decisions about what came next. But I knew I needed space that wasn't just a different room in the same house, because the walls had started to feel like they were holding something in that needed to breathe. Marina came downstairs while I was in the kitchen finishing my coffee, and she saw the bag by the stairs. She stood very still for a moment and looked at it, and then looked at me. She didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't explain, and there was something in that silence that we both understood. This wasn't a threat, and it wasn't a punishment. It was just the next honest step in something that had been moving in this direction for a long time. I rinsed my mug, picked up my bag, and walked to the front door. I looked back once, not for effect, just because it felt like the right thing to do, and Marina was standing in the kitchen doorway watching me with an expression I couldn't fully read, something between disbelief and recognition, like a part of her had known this was coming even before I did. I opened the door and walked out into the morning. So that's where I am right now. I'm staying at Jonas's place, sleeping on his couch, which he complained about loudly for about 10 minutes before making up the guest bed without being asked, because that's who he is. I don't know what happens from here. I genuinely don't. There's no plan, no lawyer on speed dial, no dramatic conclusion waiting at the end of this. Marina and I haven't spoken much since I left, and I'm not sure what either of us would say right now that would be useful. What I do know is this. I spent a long time in that marriage disappearing quietly, and I didn't even notice how far gone I was until one Tuesday night in a kitchen when 4 words finally made it impossible to keep pretending. Sometimes a person doesn't leave all at once. Sometimes they leave slowly, over months, in small daily decisions, long before they ever pack a bag or walk out a door. I had already been leaving for a long time before that morning. The bag was just the last part of it. I keep coming back to one question, and honestly, it's the reason I'm posting this at all. Could this marriage have been saved if something had changed earlier, or was the moment the respect went away already the end of it, just without the paperwork? I don't have that answer, but I have a feeling some of you might.
I don't even know. It's a heavy story, but somehow there's a sense of relief at the end. It's like you spend years trying to save something, only to finally find yourself when you stop knocking on closed doors. If you feel like you're disappearing in your own relationship right now, maybe just pause and remember what you actually enjoy, regardless of anyone else's reaction. Give yourself permission to take that space. Sometimes it's the only way to finally start breathing again.